I can't help but think, what does 2023 have in store? For me, for our church, and maybe for some of you that are just watching online but haven't yet connected with us. I'm guessing you might be watching this because you want God to speak to you. Maybe you want God to bless you. You open up the Bible and you say, God, I want to hear from you. I want you to reveal something of yourself to me. Maybe you've prayed in the hope that God might hear you and something might change. Well, I wonder what will change this year. What will happen this year? Maybe the war in Ukraine, maybe it's something to do with the COVID pandemic or the state of our politics and the finance in this country. But I don't think that I can afford to mess around anymore. There's something inside me that needs to make 2023 count. For this year to make a difference in my life. I don't just want God to bless me. I want something to change that makes a real difference in my life. To do something that at the end of my life, when I get to heaven, God's kind of there and he's saying to the angels, hey, look, that's the guy I was talking to you about. Is that too much of a bold thing to want? And if any way that might happen, how? How does that happen? How do I live my life in such a way that God doesn't just bless me, but uses me to bless other people? And if you're thinking, yeah, that's me, or maybe you're just thinking, I'd like that to be me, then this message is for you. But it comes with a warning, because you might never be the same again. I want to start this morning by just telling you a story. This particular story, and it's a true story by the way, it took place 504 years ago. It took place in 1519. There's a guy called Hernando Cortez, and he lands on the shores of the Yucatan in Mexico with 500 soldiers, 100 sailors and 11 ships. And with that force, he was going to take over the Aztecs. He'd heard of their fabled gold, and he was going to capture the gold. But the problem was, the Aztecs had been a superpower in the Middle Americas for over 600 years, and they're not going anywhere. There's like no realistic chance to think that he could actually do this. So some of the soldiers, they thought to themselves, this is a death sentence. This is like a suicide mission. So they hatch a plan. They hatch a plan to take the boats and then to sail back to Cuba. Well, Hernandez hears about this. And as he's caught wind of this, what he does is he gathers the soldiers together and he gathers the sailors and he gets them all down on the beach. And then he gives them this command: burn the ships. He was so confident that he was going to get the gold, and eventually he did. But some of the soldiers, and they asked him and they said, well, look, now we've burnt the ships, how are we possibly going to get home? And he said to them, I love this, he said, if we ever get back home, it will be on their ships. Now that's an awesome movie scene if ever I've seen one. I don't love what he did, but I love the way he did it. And I want to be a Christian just like that. Burn the ships. And so if we ever get back, it's going to be on Jesus' ships, not mine. And so there's a line in the sand. You have to be fully 100% committed. You don't have to do it all at once. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for direction. We're looking for full-hearted commitment. Even with your failures and sins and imperfections, that's okay. God can deal with that stuff. As long as you're faced forward in the right direction with no other option. Because here's the principle. This is kind of it for me. Retreat is easy when you keep an open option. Let me try and explain that. Maybe some of you this year, you've decided that your New Year's resolution is you're going to lose weight. But you've left a Mars bar in the chocolate drawer at home. Well, you're done. We all know that one day the Mars bar won't be in the drawer. It will be in you. And the resolution will be broken. If we ever want to make real changes, if we ever want to make 2023 really count, we have to make sure there's no exit plan. And it's hard. It reminds me of another story, one you might have heard of. And this goes back to 49 BC. Julius Caesar, before he was Julius Caesar, was a general of the Roman army. And he crossed the river Rubicon. And there it separated Italian territory from non-Italian territory. And he's over on the other side and he's fighting this vicious army. And they're big and they're bad and they're mean. But his greatest enemy wasn't in front of him. It was behind him, because political rivals back home had stripped him of the title of governor. So now he has to come home, and he's forced to come home, and he has a big choice to make. Do I come home alone and lose everything that I've been fighting for? Or do I come home with my army and risk everything? You see, it was illegal to cross the river Rubicon with a standing army. And if you did, the penalty was a gruesome, torturous death. Julius Caesar chose to cross the Rubicon and risk everything. And he says these immortal words. Maybe you've heard these words before. He says this. He says, "The die is cast." There comes a point when you come to a river, a crossing, that you just have to say, the die is cast. And maybe today that's your day. Whether you come to church or not, you know something needs to change, but you don't know how or where or when. Maybe today, this is the day, this is your Rubicon, where you go, I'm going to go all in with Jesus. It was 80 years after Julius Caesar crossed the river that there was another guy very different to Julius Caesar. And this guy was called Simon. And he was one of the 12 followers of Jesus. And he was on the north shore of the Lake of Galilee one day when Jesus had fed 5,000 people with just 5 loaves and 2 fish. And what happened is, the next day, they all came back. They wanted more. They wanted more of Jesus. And Jesus preaches a sermon, and it was kind of cool because someone that was there wrote this sermon down, and we can still read it today in John chapter 6. But let me tell you, something happened that day. There's thousands of people who are listening to Jesus, but because of what he said, do you know they all left? They were not happy at all with what Jesus says. Let me read to you the sentence that really upset them. It may upset you. Jesus said, "Very truly I tell you, unless you eat of the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you." It's not literal, but what Jesus is basically saying is this, is that you have to feed on me. I have to be your source of life. I have to be everything to you, your source of truth. I have to be the only one that can direct you in the paths that you've got in your life. Now that's a tall order. Jesus is saying, no, I'm the only one. I'm the one. Verse 60 tells us, on hearing it, many of the disciples said, "This is hard teaching, who can accept it?" And if you go down just a few verses, what we see there is it says, "From that time many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him." The room emptied and Jesus turned to the 12 disciples and he said, "Are you going to go as well?" And it's Simon Peter, who's not known for his wisdom. He gives a moment of genius, and Simon Peter says this. He says, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God." And that was Peter's Rubicon. He had to make a decision. And here's the thing. If you were somehow to go back 2,000 years to that time, if you were to take Julius Caesar and you were to take Simon Peter, and you were asking the people in front of you, well, which one of these is going to be remembered in history? Nobody would choose Peter. Back then it would have made no sense. You see, Caesar the emperor, or Peter the nobody. But if you go to Rome today, you can actually visit the tomb of Julius Caesar. It's in the middle of a town, and the tour guide will take you there, and he'll take you past this wall, and behind this wall there's this pile of stones. That is the tomb of Julius Caesar. It's not particularly impressive. Simon Peter actually went and preached at Rome. He died by crucifixion, and they were going to crucify Peter. And he said to them, I'm not worthy to die like my Lord. So they crucified him upside down. And they buried him just 2 miles away from where Julius Caesar was buried. Let me show you what they built on top of Peter's tomb. St. Peter's Basilica. Who's greater now? And here's what's kind of cool about this for me. That building was not built because of Peter. It was built because of Jesus, who Peter followed. Peter didn't want any accolades, but he lived with the upper draft of Jesus' power and honour, because once he made the decision to go all in, to burn all the ships and say, I want to follow Jesus. And you can come with all your failures, with all your mess, and you're welcome here, just as you are. But you're not welcome to stay that way. And what Jesus demands, whatever and wherever you start from, what he demands is this: whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Do you know, you might have even heard that said before. And Jesus goes on to say, for whoever wants to save their lives will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. That's Jesus' call for you, and it's radical. It is all in. It's an uncompromising demand that you give your life to him, that you can start where you are and take baby steps, but ultimately, do you know that my message to you this morning is this: ultimately, you've got to burn the ships.